Dear friends, a very warm welcome to you all. And today I am going to discuss about one of the acute complications of diabetes, which is diabetic ketoacidosis. As we know, there are two acute disorders related to severe hyperglycemia, that is when blood sugar is more than 250 milligram per deciliter. It leads to DKA and HHS. DKA is diabetic ketoacidosis and HHS is hyperglycemic hyperosmolar state. Presence of ketone body in urine and plasma of the patient differentiate DKA from HHS. Now let's see what leads to this diabetic ketoacidosis. This arises in a condition when there is a decrease in level of insulin in the body and associated with increase in the concentration of glucagon, catecholamine, cortisol and growth hormone. What happens as a result that insulin to glucagon ratio is decreased. Since insulin is decreased, numerator is decreased, so insulin to glucagon ratio is decreased, and because of this decrease in insulin to glucagon ratio, there is gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis and ketone body formation. Because of gluconeogenesis, which happens in liver, the blood glucose level rises. Then again in liver there is glycogenolysis, because of which again blood sugar rises, and the fatty acid metabolism is directed towards the formation of ketone body. Now, because of these pathological changes, let's see what happens in the body. So, as we know, the term is diabetic ketoacidosis. So, the description is related to these three terms. The first is diabetic. So, there is hyperglycemia, which is more than 250 milligram per deciliter. The second term is keto, which means there is ketosis and we are able to detect ketone bodies in urine and blood. And because of this increase in ketone bodies, which are acetate, acetoacetone and beta hydroxybutyrate, there is change in pH that leads to acidosis, and this is metabolic acidosis, and the pH is 6.8 to 7.3. Because of these acidotic changes, there is decrease in the level of bicarbonates. The acidosis which we get is high anion gap metabolic acidosis, and acidosis leads to outward shifting of potassium. So initially there is a little rise in the level of potassium, though the total body potassium is decreased. So diabetic ketoacidosis is a potassium deficient state, but in the early phases we get raised potassium levels. Because of hyperglycemia, sodium concentration is decreased. Chloride, magnesium and phosphorus ions are also decreased. Now, how much changes does this leads to sodium? For each 100 milligram per deciliter rise in serum glucose leads to increase in sodium, decrease in sodium concentration by 1.6 milliequivalent. Because of hyperglycemia, there will be increase in serum osmolality, which can be calculated by twice of the sodium plus potassium concentration, blood glucose concentration in milligram per deciliter divided by 18, and adding blood urea nitrogen divided by 2.8. What other changes do we see in DKA? We can get raised serum creatinine and blood urea nitrogen because of dehydration. We get leukocytosis, that is increased in TLC count, and hypertriglyceridemia. Because of hyperglycemia, there is associated rise in serum triglyceride level. Now let's see what are the factors that precipitate diabetic ketoacidosis. So these are the patients who have missed their insulin administration or who are taking lesser insulin as required may land up into diabetic ketoacidosis. Now the infection, whether it is a chest infection or it is a urinary tract infection or abscess somewhere else, leads to increase in blood sugar level, higher catecholamine levels, and this also leads to precipitation of diabetic ketoacidosis. Then infarction, whether coronary artery, cerebral arteries, peripheral arteries or mesenteric arteries, anywhere if there is infarction, that will also precipitate diabetic ketoacidosis. Remember, the drugs like cocaine and pregnancy also leads to diabetic ketoacidosis. Now let's see what are the symptoms and signs with which patient of diabetic ketoacidosis comes to hospital. So the most common symptom is nausea and vomiting. So if a patient with diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, comes with the complaints of persistent nausea and vomiting, this may be the first clue for the diagnosis of DKA. Usually patient have abdominal pain. Abdominal pain is severe, sometimes epigastric, and mimics the pain of pancreatitis. So one of the differential diagnoses on the basis of abdominal pain and vomiting is acute pancreatitis. Because of rise in serum ketone level and acidosis, patient develops shortness of breath, and it is usually accompanied when patient comes to the emergency department, and very high level of blood sugar and ketosis leads to altered sensorium. Now when we examine these patients, we will find tachycardia. Because of dehydration, patient comes in hypotension, patient has tachypnea, increased respiratory rate, there is Kussmaul's respiration, and since acetone has fruity odor, so the patient has smell in the breath and it is having fruity odor. There is tenderness in the abdomen, and if patient is having neurological component, then patient is lethargic and having obtundation. So looking at the history, that if a patient with diabetes who is having any evidence of fever or having evidence of missed insulin comes with the history of nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, dyspnea and altered sensorium, we must think of diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, how will we diagnose this ketosis? For the diagnosis of ketosis, we must remember that there are three types of ketone bodies. One is acetone, the other is acetoacetate, and the third is beta hydroxybutyrate. This beta hydroxybutyrate is synthesized 3 times more than acetoacetate. Now remember, the nitroprusside test detect acetoacetate in the urine, and the concentration of acetoacetate is less than beta hydroxybutyrate. So the blood measure of beta hydroxybutyrate is preferred over urine testing with nitroprusside, as they more accurately reflect the true levels of ketone bodies. Now we are moving to the most important aspect of diabetic ketoacidosis, that how we are going to manage this patient with diabetic ketoacidosis. And regarding the management, the foremost thing is we must know what are the final problems which are associated with diabetic ketoacidosis and which needs to be managed. So the first problem is high blood glucose. So we will have to manage this high blood glucose with insulin. Second is hydration. Usually these patients are dehydrated and there is 3 to 5 liters of fluid deficit in the body which has to be managed. Then this leads to electrolyte imbalances, and these electrolyte imbalances are in the terms of sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, bicarbonate and phosphate. So we will have to manage these electrolytes. Then there is disturbance in acid base status, there is acidosis, so there is decrease in pH, bicarbonate is low, PCO2, we may get a rise in PCO2. Then there is increased concentration of beta hydroxybutyrate in the body, means there is excess of ketone bodies in the body which has to be removed, and there is impairment of renal function which is manifested as decrease in the urinary output and rise in serum creatinine level. Let's see and manage one by one. How do we manage hydration? So we have to give a lot of fluid to the diabetic ketoacidosis patient. The first fluid to be given is 2 to 3 liters of normal saline, which we call 0.9% saline, over first 1 to 3 hours, and this has to be given at the rate of 10 to 20 ml per kg per hour. So suppose a patient is having a body weight of 50 kg, so we have to give 500 ml to 1 liter of fluid per hour in first 3 hours, and after giving these 2 to 3 liters of fluid, this normal saline has to be replaced with 0.45% saline, which we call half nor, and this has to be administered at the rate of 250 to 500 ml per hour. Now once the blood sugar level has declined to less than 250 milligram per deciliter, then this 0.45% saline has to be added with 5% dextrose, and the fluid deficit which needs to be corrected is 3 to 5 liters in 24 hours. Now we have to give insulin. The insulin we use is short acting regular insulin. First we need to give 0.1 unit per kg short acting regular insulin IV bolus. So this has to be given IV as a bolus dosing. How do we calculate? We calculate it simply by dividing the body weight by 10. Suppose a patient is having body weight of 50 kg, give 50 by 10, that is 5 units. If he is a 60 kg person, give 6 units. If he is a 70 kg person, give 7 units. So that's very simple. Just divide the body weight by 10 and give that much of insulin IV stat. Now you have to start insulin infusion. The insulin infusion is started at the rate of 0.1 unit per kg per hour continuous infusion. Now how to calculate it? Suppose the patient is having a body weight of 50 kg. So whatever the body weight of patient is, you have to take that much insulin. A patient with 50 kg, 50 units, 60 kg, 60 units, 70 kg, 70 units, and this much of the insulin has to be dissolved depending upon whether you are using infusion pump or you are using normal saline bottle. If you are using infusion pump, then the amount of insulin equal to body weight has to be added to 50 ml of normal saline, and this has to be given in 10 hours. So simply, what we do, whatever is the body weight of patient, that much units of insulin is added to 50 ml of normal saline, and this has to be given in 10 hours. So we give that insulin at the rate of 5 ml per hour, and this will be your target dosing. Now if you don't have this insulin pump or infusion pump, then what will you do? You have to add the insulin equal to the person's body weight into 500 ml of normal saline, and this again has to be given in 10 hours. So what will you do? You will have to infuse at the rate of 50 ml per hour. Now let me tell you one more formula how to adjust the drop rate. Now suppose whatever amount of fluid has to be given in 1 hour, you simply has to divide it by 4. So here what I said that you have to use 50 ml of fluid in 1 hour. So the 50 divided by 4, that is approximately we will start the infusion at the rate of 12 drop per minute, and this will be the target dosing. Now let's see. The rate of insulin infusion can be increased to 0.2 to 0.3 units per kg body weight, that is 2 to 3 times of the earlier started dosing if there is no response and there is no decline in blood sugar level by 2 to 4 hours. And if the rate of decline is adequate and the blood sugar level is falling below 250 milligram per deciliter, then you have to decrease the rate, and the maintenance of this insulin infusion or insulin continuous infusion will be 0.02 to 0.1 unit per kg per hour according to the response. Now, what else you need to know? Whenever the plasma glucose is declined by 200 to 250 milligram per deciliter, then dextrose is added to this 0.45% normal saline to maintain the plasma glucose level between 150 to 200 milligram per deciliter. And the most important, remember that insulin has to be continued at a lower rate to inhibit ketogenesis. So if the blood sugar has declined, you need not to stop insulin, because if there will be no insulin, again new ketone body will be formed by ketogenesis. So you have to give insulin even when the blood sugar level is low, between 150 to 200 milligram per deciliter. Now for this, since you have to continue insulin and blood sugar level is already on the lower side, so along with insulin you have to give dextrose, and that is why this dextrose has been added to this 0.45% normal saline. Why insulin is required? Because insulin will decrease the lipolysis, it will decrease the hepatic ketone formation, and it will increase the peripheral ketone body uses. Now, another important aspect, how we are going to manage the potassium. So, DKA is a potassium depletion state. So the total body potassium is low in case of DKA. So, and insulin also promotes hypokalemia, that is insulin leads to inverse shifting of potassium from extracellular fluid to intracellular fluid. So we have to maintain this potassium level by repletion of potassium salt. We have to start potassium when urine output is adequate and the serum potassium is normal. Remember, I discussed in previous slide that initially because of ketosis or acidosis there is increase in potassium level. So at the start we are not going to give potassium, but once the potassium levels are normal and urine output is adequate, we have to start potassium infusion. So 20 to 40 milli equivalent of potassium in each liter of IV fluid is adequate. The target for serum potassium is more than 3.5 milli equivalent per liter. And if we are expecting or we are having hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis because of NaCl infusion, we can reduce the content of chloride ions, which is a constituents of potassium chloride KCl. We can change this KCl compound with potassium phosphate or acetate to avoid this problem. Now, what to do for the bicarbonate? Normally, we do not need to replace the bicarbonate, but yes, if the patient is having severe acidosis and pH is less than 7.0, then only we have to supplement bicarbonate, and this bicarbonate has to be given at a rate of 50 milli equivalent per liter of soda bicarb in 200 ml of sterile water, along with 10 milli equivalent per liter of KCl, and this has to be given in 2 hours. And remember, our target is to maintain the pH above 7.0. But this rapid correction of acidosis has to be avoided, because rapid reversal of acidosis leads to impairment of cardiac function and reduction in tissue oxygenation. Now, at the end, you have to remember that cerebral edema is a result of therapy. So we have to be very careful when we are replacing fluid and we are correcting acidosis, otherwise cerebral edema may be hazardous. And with appropriate therapy, the mortality rate is very low in diabetic ketoacidosis. So we have to be very careful while managing diabetic ketoacidosis, and with your mathematical calculation and care you can save a lot of patients which present to you in critical condition. At the end, when this patient has improved, how to follow up? So follow up is essential to prevent the future recurrence, and for prevention of this future recurrence, the most important thing is patient education. You have to educate the patient about how to take care of his or her blood glucose level. He must be able to recognize the early symptoms of diabetic ketoacidosis. He should be aware of what are the precipitating events whenever patient gets any infection, any change in the meals, any variation in insulin intake. He has to be very careful. He should be advised to measure the blood glucose frequently. The patient should maintain the hydration adequately to avoid landing up into diabetic ketoacidosis, and he must continue the insulin and adjust the insulin doses as per requirement. That's all about diabetic ketoacidosis. Thank you, and thank you very much. Hope you will learn to manage the diabetic ketoacidosis.